Welcome, everyone, and thank you so much for being here, to those who are here live and also those who are listening to the recording. Today's event is called Team Building or Breaking, a panel discussion on hazing, education, and prevention. My name is Rebecca Milliman, and I am from the Harborview Abuse and Trauma Center and the program Athletes as Leaders. And I'd like to start by thanking our partners for this event. So this event is being hosted by Athletes as Leaders, which is a program for high school athletes, specifically a violence prevention program that leverages the power of sports and specifically high school sport athlete leadership. The Harborview Abuse and Trauma Center, we're a crime victim service center and a sexual assault program, and Team Up Washington, which is an initiative in Washington State to train high school athletic coaches and mentors in facilitating conversations with their athletes to create safer and more welcoming communities. I also want to give a shout out to these other partners who have really helped promote this and sent a bunch of people here today. We have folks at the WSSAAA conference, which is literally just wrapping up as we speak, and sending athletic directors to this training, as well as coaches, as well as all these awesome departments at the UW, the Community Standards and Student Conduct Office, the Office of Fraternity and Sorority Life, and Live Well. Thank you all for your partnership and helping us promote this event. And lastly, I would like to introduce our amazing panel for today. We are very sorry that unfortunately, due to unforeseen circumstances, Tara Davis had to cancel, and so she is not going to be on our panel today, and we'll miss her. And I do want to introduce our remaining 4 panelists. So first up, we have Dr. Elizabeth Allen. Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you for being here. We also have Jelaine Houtz and Hector Martinez. Thank you so much for being here. Good morning.
Good morning.
And lastly, I'm going to introduce our panel moderator, my amazing student, Ellie Greenberg. She is a Master of Social Work graduate student at the University of Washington. She's currently interning with me at the Harborview Abuse and Trauma Center in the violence prevention team. And she has also had a long history of working in domestic violence and sexual violence as an advocate. She received her BA in sociology and anthropology from Middlebury College. She is a former professional athlete and collegiate athlete, and she is very passionate about leveraging sports for social impact. And she's actually going to continue her studies next year after she graduates from the MSW and continuing on at the UW's Center for Leadership in Athletics as a Master of Education candidate. Ellie, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you so much, Rebecca, for that introduction. Today, we are honored to host a panel of professionals connected to the issue of hazing. We have academic experts, policy advocates, and family members of hazing victims to learn more about the scope and impact of this issue. For today's discussion, each panelist will speak about their connection and knowledge of this topic. At the end of these presentations, we'll open the panel for questions, so please save all of your comments and questions until the very end. For our first panelist, I am thrilled to have the opportunity to learn from Dr. Elizabeth Allen. Dr. Allen is a professor at the University of Maine, where she extensively researches student hazing and prevention. She's the author of 2 books and has published more than 40 research-based articles and book chapters. Dr. Allen was the principal investigator for the National Study of Student Hazing and is currently directing the National Hazing Prevention Consortium. She has presented research for the United States Senate Committee and at national conferences, institutes, and workshops. She's also the principal of StopHazing.org, our go-to hazing prevention resource that we'll be sharing throughout today's panel in the chat. Dr. Allen, thank you for being with us here today.
All right. Thank you so much, Ellie and everyone. It's good to be here with all of you and really appreciate this opportunity to share a brief overview of how the research can provide insights to inform hazing prevention. Let me just hang a minute here while we get the slides going. All right, great. So we can move to the next slide now. Thanks, Lindsay. So to begin, I want to be sure we are all on the same page about what we mean by the term hazing. As you see here, hazing is generally defined as any activity expected of someone joining or participating in a group that humiliates, degrades, abuses, or endangers them, regardless of a person's willingness to participate. While there are variations of this definition, the three core tenets listed below are really important for an accurate understanding of hazing. First, that group context, that hazing involves behavior that is associated with the process of joining or maintaining membership in a team, club, or organization. And second, that is, it involves abusive or potentially abusive behavior. And the third core component or tenet is that it can occur regardless of an individual's willingness to participate. That is, there's a recognition that true choice or consent may be eroded by peer pressure and the coercive power dynamics that can exist in the context of someone seeking to gain full membership in a group. So next, how much of a problem is hazing? As you see here, according to a national study, more than half of college students belonging to clubs, organizations, and teams reported experiencing behaviors that met the definition of hazing. And on the next slide, we see that nearly half also reported experiencing those behaviors when they were in high school. Many folks think of hazing as a fraternity sorority issue primarily. That's where we hear a lot about it. But this slide portrays from the research findings about the types of groups where hazing occurs most frequently, including 74% of varsity athletes in the study reported experiencing hazing, 73% of students who belong to fraternities and sororities, 64% of club sport members, 56% of those students who belong to performing arts organizations like marching bands and a cappella groups, 49% of those involved in intramural teams, 42% involved in a recreational club or team, 28% academic clubs, and 20% of those participating in an honor society indicated they had experienced hazing or behaviors that met the definition of hazing. All right, next slide, please. Thanks. So we know that hazing is relatively widespread, and we also know from the research that it takes many different forms. This visual provisionally categorizes hazing according to three types: intimidation, harassment, and violence. And then the visual also depicts these types of hazing along two continua, those blue arrows at the top and bottom that are labeled recognition at the top and frequency at the bottom. We have recognition is from low to high, moving left to right, and frequency high to low, moving left to right. So the visual is working to convey this inverse relationship between these two indicators. So if you look to the right, you see behaviors that are more likely to be recognized and labeled as hazing. That is, recognition is higher for forms of hazing listed under the heading violence, whereas intimidation forms of hazing are less likely to be recognized, but we believe they occur with much greater frequency. There's some evidence to support that. This lack of recognition of harassment and intimidation forms of hazing may be contributing to a disconnect we've seen in the research. Next slide, please. Thank you. So there is a gap that exists between student experiences of hazing and their willingness to label it as such. Referring back to the statistic of the 55% of college students who indicated they experienced behavior that met the definition of hazing, only 9% of those students identified it when asked directly. Thank you. So, given these research highlights, we have a little bit, of a high-level overview of the context and the nature and extent of hazing among students. Let's turn to a high-level overview of what we know, what the research has informed us about ways to prevent it. All right. So here you see the visual of the hazing prevention framework in the center. the HPF for short. It's a research-based framework that's grounded in the principles of prevention science and modeled in accordance with the CDC's strategic prevention framework. It includes 8 interlocking components: commitment, capacity, assessment, planning, evaluation, cultural competence, sustainability, and implementation. According to research in public health, when these components are applied together in a comprehensive and synergistic way, we'll be more likely to shift organizational and community culture. That is, we'll be more likely to create environments that are less conducive to hazing. The data we collected and analyzed for the development of the framework were gathered from 8 colleges and universities participating in the Hazing Prevention Consortium, and we've continued to collect data since with more than 20 colleges and universities. And we did that initial data collection over a 3-year period. A more detailed explanation about that research and the analytic process we used to develop the HPF is described in the peer-reviewed article published in the Journal of Student Affairs Research and Practice in 2018. If you'd like a more concise look at each of the components, you might want to check out the toolkit pictured here on the right. That provides a quick, accessible, and practical overview, including a snapshot of each component, its definition, its characteristics, and some action steps for its implementation. It's available at no cost thanks to a partnership with Cleary Center, and you can also download it from the Stop Hazing website. All right, next slide, please. So as an example, let's take a closer look at just one of the components, commitment, which is a unique component we found from the data that relates to hazing specifically. And we define commitment as the investment of human, financial, and structural resources and public endorsement of actions that foster climate. This says campus climate, but we're working with high schools, and we're also working with the US military to translate the framework to those specific contexts. But the commitment is needed to foster a climate that's inhospitable to hazing. So let's take a closer look at what that looks like in practice. Commitment looks like clear expectations and accountability for inclusive and safe student groups, number one. It includes senior level administrators playing an active and public role endorsing hazing prevention. It includes engagement from across campus stakeholder groups. It includes incentivizing alternatives to hazing and support for building healthy leadership, healthy leaders, and healthy groups. And it includes widespread, consistent, and transparent communication about the enforcement of hazing policies. Okay, so for each of those components of the framework, we've developed a rubric, and that is something that can be used as an assessment tool and a benchmarking tool and a guide for hazing prevention. Other key components of that framework are capacity building and implementation. And here are 2 examples of research-informed implementation strategies that can help build capacity and provide information that will help shift attitudes, shifting attitudes away from those that support or tacitly condone hazing culture. The visual on the left is about the film We Don't Haze. It's a 17-minute documentary style film that has been evaluated and shown to be effective for increasing pro-social attitudes related to hazing in both high school students and college students. The toolkit on the right is a result of the collaboration with One Love, a violence prevention organization, and it uses the science of the positive to focus on building awareness of healthy versus unhealthy behaviors and groups. The implementation of evaluated and research-based trainings like these is a key ingredient for hazing prevention. However, in order to be truly effective, it's vital that the other components of the framework are considered when developing the trainings. So for instance, the training should be grounded in assessment data, and it should incorporate perspectives of the stakeholders it's designed to reach. It should be culturally competent and evaluated to test its efficacy and to fine-tune it for continual improvement. Okay, on the next slide, We see examples of how passive programming can be used and information sharing as part of an effective, comprehensive approach to hazing prevention. These are some infographics that draw from the research to provide information about how to identify and report hazing. That's the one on the left. And then on the right, another one that provides a basic overview of hazing. It's designed to reach student audiences. These and other adaptable and research-informed digital tools are available at no cost on the Stop Hazing website. Okay. And just to let you know, we are currently testing a number of other strategies for their efficacy specific to hazing prevention. And our preliminary studies show promise for particular strategies that we borrowed from other prevention arenas. For example, using a coalition-based approach, having visible leadership messaging in support of hazing prevention and group cultures that are not conducive to hazing, using social norms campaigns to shift attitudes and beliefs, and employing bystander intervention trainings, along with other strategies I've mentioned and a few more. So to learn more about these, you can find out more on our resources page of the Stop Hazing website. You can use this QR code to navigate there. So in closing, I'd like to emphasize that hazing is not an isolated issue. It's a community issue. And as such, we all have a role to play in its prevention. There are some simple things that any of us can do as a starting point. You can learn more. We can go back, sorry. Thank you. You can learn more about how to clearly identify the warning signs of hazing and know how and where to report it. And you can make opportunities to talk about hazing. Think of ways you can share information and resources about hazing and its prevention with students with whom you work, with friends, with family, with colleagues, and doing that both informally and formally will make a difference. All right, now we can go to the next slide. Thank you. So in closing, I hope these brief remarks have provided each of you with some additional information and resources you can use to feel more empowered to use a research-based approach to prevent hazing and to ensure that group and team environments are healthy and inclusive places where members are building each other up rather than breaking each other down. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Allen, for that presentation and for grounding us in the issue of hazing, its impact, and prevention frameworks. Next, I'm incredibly honored to be able to introduce our speakers, Jolaine Houts and Hector Martinez. Jolaine and Hector lost their son, Sam, following a fraternity-sponsored hazing ritual at Washington State University in 2019. Since then, they helped pass Sam's Law in Washington, which requires universities to be more transparent about hazing incidents, broadens the definition of hazing, and increases training to prevent hazing. In the latest 2023 session, they successfully advocated for the Sam Martinez Stop Hazing Law in the Washington State Legislature to increase the criminal penalties for hazing. Thank you, Jolaine and Hector, for being with us today.
You're welcome. Good morning. Sorry. Good morning. Thank you so much for the opportunity to share our family story with you. I want to start this morning by introducing you to my son. That's the easy part for me to do, as I knew him for 19 years. So I knew all about him and how wonderful he was. Sam was funny. Sam was sporty. He was handsome. And he was very loyal to his friends. He was a little goofy. And he was always making jokes with me. And always when he wanted something, he called me Papito. Or when he wanted something, he spoke to me in Spanish. So he knew that I would give him anything just to hear him speak Spanish. He had a magnetic smile and a kind heart that drew people around him, as we see nowadays. Every time we do something, there's people that we didn't even know that knew him. They come to gatherings and things that we do in memory of Sam. Sam graduated from Bellevue Public Schools and was bilingual in both Spanish and English. And like I said before, he knew how to use his Spanish with me, and he worked all the time. And in high school, he played trombone in the school band, and he played in soccer in the high school in the varsity team. He was an amazing person, in the field and outside the field. And as I remember, how many times I enjoy being with him in the rain or in the cold. I mean, the many different fields all around the state of Washington and all around here in Bellevue and Seattle. Sam was a remarkable athlete, and one of the things that I was his coach when he was little. And one of his amazing things is he always knew where the ball was gonna go, and he loved to go after the ball. So you could imagine, for me to be in their coach trying to tell them, no, everybody needs to go after the ball. You just spread and wait for the other one to pass the ball. But in the first years, that was amazing to see all of them going after the ball. But I noticed Sam was always kind of waiting for somebody to pass the ball. He wasn't together with all of them. So it amazed me how, he has soccer in his blood, which, that was his favorite thing to do. He worked with little kids as a soccer and ski coach. I never really learned well how to ski, but I always be happy to see him going up to Snoqualmie to teach little kids how to start learning to ski. And I see how, those little kids were looking after him, either when he was teaching them to ski or when he was teaching them soccer. We have a daughter, Ariana, and Sam, he adored her. They were always getting in trouble together. They were always, doing things together. And then they were just making jokes that sometimes Jolene and I couldn't understand, but they did, because they have the connection, and they knew each other so well. And to the day, I just can see them, playing together and doing all different goofy things and funny things together. He loved his two cats. One was called Snow and the other one was called Jack. And Snow was like a dog, more than a cat. He followed him everywhere he went, and the two of them have a connection, and he was always, loved those animals so much. He loves gaming a lot. And I remember here at homecoming, and they were like 9 or 10 kids, sometimes 3 or 4, but most of the times there were a lot of them playing in our couch there in our TV, playing games, in the computer. But they always competing among them. But that's one thing that he loves. He always, when I ask him what he likes the most to eat, he loves my tacos. I make tacos, they are easy and they're easy to do, but he loves them. But it's sad to say he loves more Chinese rice than my Mexican rice. Sam was deeply loyal to his close kid group of friends who, they used to do a whole bunch of things together, and then they just have so much fun together, and they call themselves their fellows. And now till the day I still enjoy going with them to places, and they always invite me to go with them and do things. And it's, but this group, it's just something that I have as a legacy that Sam left me, to enjoy his friends. They were friends since they were in kindergarten, and they're all speak Spanish. So I always, enjoyed talking to them in Spanish and see if, how good they were in Spanish. But anyway, they were a very group of friends, and he was very loyal to them, and he will always protect them. In fall of 2019, we took Sam, to school. We were very excited. We learned a lot of good things about the school, and we were so happy for him. And he was a little nervous, I remember, but he knew there were some of his friends there. And, and another thing that he was trying to do in college is, like, we hear a lot about the fraternities, and he wanted to step out of his comfort zone and join the fraternity, which, I was happy because, they were going to do study tables, they were going to do community work, and there was never a talk of bad things happening in that fraternity, especially. But he was ready, to go to college after, we were thinking he was going to stay around here, because he wasn't really, thinking more in college. He was like, oh, I just want to stay close to home. But anyway, he went to that school, and we learned later that he was going to major in business, in that school. And as we have some stuff to do that. On November 2019, I got a phone call from my brother that the police was outside my house. And as I asked him, why is the police outside the house? And he was like, well, you have to come home. And I was like, why do I have to come home? And he said, hey, Sam. I said, what's wrong with Sam? And he said, well, I cannot tell you, you need to come home. And I say, do I need to bring Jolene? Because I was working closer, to the area where Jolene was. And he said, yes, go and get Jolene. So I was like, at that moment, I knew something was wrong. After 19 years of taking care of my son, as I was thinking, something is happening to him. And I thought the worst. But nevertheless, I left. I drove from the Children's Hospital to where I was working to the University of Washington. And I was crying, and I was like praying to God that my son was okay. But I went and got Jolene. And then we came home. And as we got home, the police was outside. I don't remember exactly how many cars were there, but I was like, what's going on? And I had this nice Bellevue policeman. He just looks at me and he hugged me and says, your son is dead. He was 19 years old. We have a great family. We never thought that something like this would ever happen, but it did. We came back only few weeks, after we dropped him, all happy. We went there and bring him back home, but he was gone.
There is a researcher who developed and maintains a list of hazing deaths in the United States dating back to the 1800s. He has found that at least one hazing death has been reported each year in the United States between 1959 and 2021. That list is long. It has lots of names on it, and I sometimes scroll through it and look at all of them, and they all look like Sam to me. I wanted to introduce you to some of those other young men who have died from hazing in the past 4 years. This is Lofton and Fat Wynn and Stone and Adam and Dylan. These young men were smart, sporty, handsome, full of life and promise. All of them just wanted to belong. They had parents and siblings who loved them, just like Sam. The afternoon before Sam died, I had what would be my last phone call with him. It was a short call. We were just checking in. I am so glad that our last words to each other were warm and loving. And I'm so glad I told him I loved him before I hung up. That evening, Sam was right where he was supposed to be, in the library at Washington State University, studying along with his fellow pledges at the mandatory study tables required by the fraternity that he was pledging, Alpha Tau Omega. Unexpectedly, all the pledges got a message that they needed to report to the fraternity right away. It was Big Little night. We would learn later that this is considered one of the 3 deadliest nights in the fraternity industry, along with midnight and initiation. In the name of brotherhood, each pledge is expected to consume a toxic amount of alcohol to demonstrate their allegiance. Sam and his fellow pledges were taken down to the basement of ATO to learn who their quote unquote big brothers would be. Sam was handed a handle of rum by his so-called big brother and told to drink the family drink. That's a half gallon of rum, 40 shots. Sam and another pledge between them drank that bottle in 30 minutes to an hour. Over the next few hours, dozens of fraternity members saw Sam clearly incapacitated and ultimately losing consciousness. There might have been 50 or 60 people there that night. If each person walked by Sam twice that evening, that was 100 times there was the chance to save Sam. Not one called for help. Not one did a thing, even as he struggled. They laid him on a couch in the basement and they left him alone to die of alcohol poisoning. His blood alcohol level was nearly 5 times the legal limit. What is clear is that this didn't have to happen. If just one person had tried to help, Sam would still be alive today. What we learned in the terrible weeks and months after Sam's death is that Sam and the other pledges were subjected to a pervasive pattern of hazing that began in their very first days on campus. The police report is 283 pages long, and it includes details like how pledges were humiliated and demeaned, yelled at and beaten, slapped and tackled. Pledges were forced to eat onions and drink hot sauce and do wall squats and have hot sauce squirted in their eyes. Pledges were required to report to the house in the early morning hours to clean it, sometimes as early as 5 a.m., sometimes cleaning with toothbrushes in the dark, sometimes with death metal music cranked up on high. How did the fraternity respond in the aftermath of Sam's death? The first call they made was to ATO's national headquarters, and they were told to delete their social media accounts. They were told not to talk to the media. They held an emergency meeting to get their stories straight and agree among them that there was no forced drinking. And then many of them got lawyers. We would learn later that ATO had a long history of hazing, alcohol, drug, and other misconduct violations at WSU that dated back at least 6 years before Sam was killed. Both WSU and ATO knew this at the highest leadership levels and did nothing. Hector and I have tried to make purpose out of our pain. Last spring, we helped pass Sam's Law in the Washington State Legislature. The law requires education about hazing for new students and also for university staff and employees. Each university must now create a hazing prevention committee that includes students with a chair appointed by the university president. Sam's Law also requires colleges and universities to publicly report details about fraternity hazing violations and also other offenses, including drug and alcohol violations, sexual assault, and physical assault. This is how Sam's Law defines hazing in Washington State. The last line in particular is something really significant to us and something that we fought hard to keep in the language here. And as pointed out by Dr. Allen earlier, the language is, these actions are hazing regardless of the person's willingness to participate. The point is, victims of hazing can't consent to their own hazing. Their ability to consent is impaired by all kinds of things, including, as Dr. Allen said, the power hierarchy of the fraternity, group dynamics, brain development, and the individual's desire for belonging, and of course by alcohol and drug consumption. Because of Sam's Law and the new college reporting requirements, we know that hazing remains a serious issue on college campuses. The University of Washington suspended one of its fraternities for hazing last spring. Eastern Washington University withdrew recognition from another fraternity for hazing last fall. And WSU is currently investigating 3 fraternities for possible hazing last fall, including one where the hazing was so extreme it is believed to have led to the suicide death of another young man, Luke Tyler. This year, we've been working again with lawmakers in Olympia to continue our work to end hazing. The governor is just about to sign a companion bill to Sam's Law, which is called the Sam Martinez Stop Hazing Law, that makes hazing a felony when someone is seriously injured or killed. In addition, we are launching a new project in partnership with Dr. Allen and the StopHazing.org, as well as the University of Washington Information School. Together, we are creating a new first-of-its-kind national database on hazing incidents at U.S. colleges and universities. It will be free and searchable by the public so that incoming college students and their families have access to information to make informed decisions about the organizations their students join. Our goal is to help bring hazing out of the shadows and empower students and families with the kind of information we didn't have access to when Sam was joining. Sam was not the only victim of the hazing incident that took his life. The ripple effect through our circle of family and friends continues to reverberate. Many of Sam's friends still struggle to talk about his death. Some have received counseling. Some still don't know how to put what happened to them in words, and they suffer in silence. Every summer since Sam's death, many of us gather at the summer camp where Sam grew up for a weekend of work projects, laughter, and remembrance. These young people were at such a tender age when they lost their friend. Our sincere hope is that our camp weekend together helps with their healing and ours. Sadly, hazing is still happening right now on our college campuses. It's not just in Greek organizations, of course, but it's also on athletic teams and in marching bands and in theater groups and in the military and in workplaces. I worry about the toxic hazing culture that continues and the hazing cases that don't make the news, the ones where people are injured or traumatized, where young people become depressed or suicidal from being relentlessly targeted by hazing. For now, Sam's story remains unfinished. Our family will continue to channel our grief into the one good thing that might come of our tragedy, the chance to save someone else's child from hazing. Thank you so much for your time and for listening to us today.
Thank you so much, Jolene and Hector, for sharing your story with us. It is an honor to learn about Sam and your family. Your advocacy work around preventing hazing after such a loss is really inspiring. And we are so grateful for the knowledge you shared with us and for your dedication to this cause. Thank you. Before we move forward to my presentation, I would love to take a collective deep breath. Thank you. I will now be presenting about a hazing initiative we've been working on that is launching nationally today, a hazing prevention initiative. I've had the honor this past year to work with Rebecca at Athletes as Leaders. And today we are presenting the national launch of our new hazing prevention initiative for high school athletes called the Preseason Chat. So for some background on Athletes as Leaders, it's a program that intends to empower student athletes to be leaders in their school and beyond. The hope is that these athletes recognize the power that they have in changing culture, not only on their team, but in their school communities as well. Athletes as Leaders is aimed at high school athletes on girls' sports teams, and it's recommended to be a complement program to a prevention initiative that intentionally engages boys' teams. And this is because everybody has a role to play in preventing violence. It's also based on research and best practices in the field of sexual assault prevention. Now we'll have a chance to learn from some athletes that went through the program. And a side note, one of the athletes featured here was a senior when she went through the program in high school, and then went on to be one of my college teammates at Middlebury. We played soccer together, and she's featured here in this video.
There's no better time to learn about these things than right now, because it's kind of when we need it the most.
Most people look up to athletes and think that they're a role model that they can follow. You can't expect to learn a lot about your team and other people and kind of step into other people's shoes and think from their perspective.
And it let me be who I wanted to be. When we leave, we just feel like a better person.
So quick overview on the format of the program. It's a 10-week program where a coach or mentor has a conversation with the team for about 20 minutes on a different topic each week. Here are some of the topics listed that we talk about in this program, and they build on each other, and they are all intended to get at the root issues of violence and an intent to promote healthy and empowered cultures. And you'll see here, they're all connected to some form of preventing interpersonal violence. And I've had the honor, like I said, to work at Athletes as Leaders this year as a mentor myself, implementing this program with teams, as a trainer, and also working for the program in taking it in new directions. And so One of those directions is in hazing prevention. And so I had a conversation with Rebecca about how hazing is a form of interpersonal violence and abuse, and how we can create a session for athletes as leaders to specifically address the issue of hazing. So we came up with the preseason chat, a preventative approach to hazing. So this session is called Returning Athletes and Team Building, and separate from the rest of the sessions where it is between the coach and the entire team, this session is intended to be a dialogue between the coach and the returning athletes, the high school athletes that have that power that Dr. Allen spoke about, that power over the newcomers on that team dynamic. And so, whereas all the other sessions, it's a conversation between the coach and the whole team, this is just a preseason conversation between the coach and the returners. It's 20 minutes and the coach leads it, and it's a dialogue where the coach is helping set these team cultures, but also it's a conversation with the athletes about what kind of culture they want to promote. This session can either be a standalone 20-minute conversation, or it can be the introduction to the entire Athletes as Leaders program. So it can either be session 0 of 10, or if a team doesn't have capacity to implement the entire Athletes as Leaders program, they can just have this one conversation. It's also written and piloted with the intent of having of being used with boys and girls teams and co-ed teams. So that's different from the larger program as well. So every Athletes as Leaders session has 3 key messages, and these are all intended to ground the coach in the intent of that conversation. Sometimes I've noticed as a mentor, the athletes can take the conversations in ways that you didn't necessarily anticipate, and these key messages are really great ways to bring back the conversation to the root of what we're talking about. And so the first key message here is that team leaders are responsible for creating a safe and welcoming environment for new teammates. So it's having those upperclassmen, those seniors, those captains, returning athletes recognize the power that they have over these newcomers and talking about ways that they can use it to build a healthy community. The second key message is that team leaders play a key role in preventing harm. This includes harm that happens on and off campus, within or beyond sports, and online. Hazing, assault, emotional abuse, bullying, and harassment will not be tolerated on this team. So this is intended to help the returning athletes recognize that when a coach isn't present, they're the ones with the power, and how will they use that? And third key message is creating new traditions that help team bonding and growth. So like Dr. Allen spoke about, best practice in the field of violence prevention is that not only is it necessary to recognize the harmful behaviors, but it's really important to replace them with more pro-social, positive, healthy traditions. So if from this conversation, it comes up that there's a tradition that the athletes don't want to continue, then this session offers a way for them to brainstorm new, exciting and positive team building activities. So to give you an idea into what kind of questions the coach is asking of these athletes, the first is, what would make you feel welcomed if you're a new player? Another one is, as a leader on this team, what type of culture do you want to promote? What do we want to avoid? And so just getting at that foundational level of what is this team culture about? There's also a team talk component where they talk specifically about the traditions that they've had on the team, whether they want to continue doing it or not. In my experience in high school and college and professional sports, sometimes the leaders feel some weight or just expectation that they continue these traditions because it's what's always been done. And actually my senior year, of college, I got together with captains and we talked about some of those traditions, and we had an intentional dialogue about what do we like about them? Do we want to continue doing that? And so this session offers a space for that. And like I said, there's an opportunity to brainstorm some healthy team bonding activities that they want to do this season. And really getting at that second key message, how can they continue to promote those safe and welcoming environments without the coach present? And that could be in the classroom, at lunch, or specifically with high school students. It's really important to think about the spaces they're occupying online and how they can create a healthy culture there that promotes those positive tendencies that they talked about in the discussion. I was really fortunate to have the opportunity to pilot this session at a few different sites in Washington State. And what I really loved about observing those implementations is that the coach, specifically one coach, was able to use this session as a template, a launching pad. So he and I went through it together. We talked about different ways he could implement this conversation. And then I observed as he did an amazing job of really tailoring it to that school's specific needs. So replacing some of the language with the mascot or referencing some traditions that their team had. And so this session can either be read word for word, which is really helpful when you're a new mentor and coach and need that guidance. Also, if you're wanting to fit your school specific needs, then you can use this as that launching pad. And so I want to highlight some of the quotes that I heard while observing this piloted session. One athlete said, "I felt welcomed on this team as a freshman when older players helped me with homework, encouraged me at practice." And so that was really great to see that player recognize what was positive when they were new and how they were stepping into a leadership role and how they could promote some of those positive team building ways that the seniors had done when they were younger. Another quote is, "As a leader, I want to promote a culture of positivity. When I was younger, the seniors called the freshmen names, and I don't want to do that anymore." And so this athlete was recognizing the harmful behavior that he experienced and wanting to make a change as a leader on the team. This next quote is, "I like when we have team dinners, but I also wish we could have one big table so starters are sitting with everyone else." And this was really great to hear and watch this athlete say, because the coach recognized like, oh, I love the team dinners also, but I didn't realize there was some dynamic happening. Like, what if we had one big table or we had assigned seats? And the athletes were all like, yes, that would be amazing. So this was a way to celebrate an already positive, healthy team building activity and still alter it in a way that made the athletes feel like they were promoting that culture that they wanted. And finally, this last quote is, "As a leader, I want to set a good example for the younger players. I remember how one negative senior affected the whole team culture." So this athlete was really recognizing that what his actions were as a leader were going to have big implications for the younger athletes and the team culture at large. So he was recognizing that he had the power to either have a negative emotion and negative impacts, say things negatively to the younger athletes, or could continue to promote that positive culture that we talked about earlier in the session. This is so exciting that today is the day that we're not launching nationally this preseason session. And so I believe Monica will put a link in the chat to our programs page on the Athletes as Leaders website, where all of our material is free and ready to download and print. And so if this is a session that interests you, you can access it there. Like I said, it can be used as a launching pad in your environments if you work with high school athletes or college athletes, or not even athletes at all. If you want to take this template and use it to really shape a team culture that you're on, please feel free to access it there and read it through and learn more about it. And I included my email here. So if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out there. Thank you so much. That was really, really exciting to be able to launch the Athletes as Leaders session nationally. Next up is our Q&A portion of today's forum. And if you see on the bottom of your Zoom screen, there is a button that should say Q&A. Please feel free and welcome to ask any questions of any of our panelists that you want. And yeah, please submit them there. And while those questions are coming in, I'd love for Dr. Allen and Jolene and Hector to come on screen where I can get us going with some first questions from myself. Dr. Allen, first for you, I would love to learn more about your experience being a leader in so many of these projects and initiatives that research hazing and hazing prevention. And I would love to learn from you, like as a leader, is there something that you do that intentionally fosters a healthy group environment and promotes those like positive pro-social behaviors we were talking about in your work and in your professional life?
Wow, that is a great question, Ellie. And one that I don't think anyone's asked me so directly before. But yeah, I mean, I would like to think I've thought a lot about leadership over the years and how to create more egalitarian spaces, be aware of one's power dynamics. I think it's as we've talked about today, it's not always obvious to folks how they might have power in a situation. And in our research, we found repeatedly that most often individuals recognize physical force and types of power in hazing, but not always other forms of power that they may have in terms of their status, their social identities, their leadership role, and so forth. So I do try to implement that awareness in my own work as a leader in the field or as a professor in my classrooms. It's not easy and it takes vigilance. And of course, there are going to be mistakes along the way. But I think also understanding, having gone through trainings for diversity, equity, and inclusion, and equity mindedness in organizations, all those kinds of professional development can help with thinking about power dynamics in a group. And so I really draw on a lot of that in terms of thinking about my own, leadership, but also translating it to specifically to hazing prevention. So yeah, I think those are, it's really, about awareness first, but and self-reflection, and also about asking, and when you work with people and try to create those egalitarian spaces, you need to bring people in and ask for their input and listen. So I think that's, so often maybe not a part of the culture with some groups, because it's just expected that those who have most seniority are going to be the ones who know. And that's something that we really need to disrupt. And we need to help create more inclusive spaces where everyone has something important to contribute, and that's really truly recognized. So those are just a few things that come to mind in response to your question. Thank you for that question.
Yeah, and thank you for that answer. That's really great to hear from you. For Jolene and Hector, you talked briefly about last year's law and how it required colleges to provide hazing education and training. Do you have any insight into the impact that had, especially on local schools here in Washington?
Yeah, thank you for that question. What I know is that the state's flagship university, the University of Washington, has hired its first ever hazing prevention coordinator, who I believe is on the call today. And that is incredibly exciting. And I think what I'm seeing is that the UW is working to be a leader in this space and an example that other universities in our state can look for and model after, which I think is really exciting. I believe that there is some custom training for new students and faculty and staff that will be coming online at the University of Washington. I think across some of our other universities, while I haven't done a thorough deep dive, I am not sure how thoroughly Sam's Law has been implemented. I think some things are in process, and I understand that it takes a while for things to come up and be online, but hoping to see even more over time. And I think, you know, it's a toolkit of tools that we need to change culture on campuses. So I think the education and training part is, of course, critical, but so too is transparency and giving people access to good information, timely and accurate information. Too often hazing isn't something that we talk about. It's very often not reported, goes on in secret, and it's time to pull back the veil on that, I think. And in addition to all of that, I think also it's important to have serious criminal penalties when hazing results in an injury, serious injury, or a death. Right now in Washington, hazing is a misdemeanor, which is the equivalent of stealing a shopping cart. And that is both offensive and ineffective. So in our state, we will see it increase to a gross misdemeanor with the signing of this bill, and become a felony, a Class C felony in cases of serious injury or death. Did you want to add anything?
Thank you so much for elaborating on that. For Dr. Allen, I just hearing Jolene speak about the timeliness of this information. I'm curious if you've seen, with the advancements in technology, if you've seen any impact both in hazing as a practice, but also in the field of hazing prevention. Like what has the advancements of technology meant for that field?
Well, that's another great question, Ellie. I think it depends what kind of technology we're talking about. Certainly in, recent years, as folks have become more familiar with using technology like Zoom and so forth, we can have events like this, and I can be all the way in Maine, and we can talk together and share experiences and learn from each other. It makes it a lot easier as far as that goes, in terms of networking and sharing resources and learning from each other related to prevention. During COVID, a lot of questions came up about would we see hazing stop because of folks not being together as much in spaces, and we didn't see that. We saw, unfortunately, how technology can be used in hazing, and so I think it's really important for folks to be aware, of both, and that hazing really isn't about the actual activity. It's about how it's implemented. It's about those power dynamics, where even something like drinking water can become hazing. And so we saw that even when people weren't together physically, hazing still occurred. But to your question about changes in prevention with technology, I think the biggest would be the ability to network and share, not only like coast to coast, but internationally as well, and having, more opportunities for conversations and conferences and so forth, where we can share information. And we've had the information on the websites for a long time, our information, but I think as that technology improves, for example, we're just launching an online course that that's hazing prevention focused, research-based hazing prevention focused. So it's like a 20-minute curriculum that's designed for students. and that's mobile friendly. So there's lots of ways in which we can increase access to information as technology improves, and also increasing access to reporting. So there are some good apps in development for that, and I think we're just gonna, continue to chip away at it and see how we can best use all these resources to accelerate the pace of change and prevention.
Great, thank you for that answer. I'm seeing a lot of questions coming through the Q&A, so I'm going to transition to answering those from the audience. The first question for anyone on the panel is, how can you identify the line between something that's team bonding and hazing? And how can you make sure that practices that are in existence aren't causing harm? How can you know?
Well, I can jump in to start us off, but feel free, anyone else. We have some resources we've developed for having these kinds of conversations because it is very contextual. And I think early on in hazing prevention work and policy development, students would always ask for a list of prohibited behaviors. And that's still the case because that seems to be like, well, just tell us what we can't do. And what we found out pretty quickly is that that's not effective because, well, there's a place for it. It's not going to be enough. It's not sufficient because we really have to be able to have those conversations about the nuances that I mentioned before of how something that's seemingly healthy, like drinking water or study hours, or can seemingly positive, can cross the line into hazing. And the way you do that is you have conversations about the power dynamics, the potential risks, why it is we're doing this, how does it align with our values as an organization or as a team, what is the outcome we're trying to achieve, and will we achieve that outcome, and is there a better way to get to that outcome that doesn't place people at risk of harm or potentially humiliate or degrade them. So again, it's something that, when we have facilitators guides that can help with those kinds of conversations, it's not an easy question to answer, except to say that it depends. And there are ways to determine it, and there are strategies by asking some critical questions.
Great, thank you so much for that response. This other question I'm seeing coming through is, I think, in response to Sam's Law, and it's curious, this person is curious to learn, if you're aware of fraternities and sororities and sports teams, with this new hazing prevention, education, and training, do you know about their reaction? Are they interested and willing to learn? Are they resistant? Do you know how that education and training landed within the student bodies themselves?
I think we've heard some really good feedback from students about this. I think I've heard a little grumbling too, maybe on the part of particularly faculty and staff who maybe don't interact every single day with students and aren't quite sure why they need to take the training. But our feeling was it was really important to include the adults who are in these young adults' orbit, so that everybody kind of had a common understanding. And, if you're a janitor, are you cleaning the weight room, for example, where something like this might be going on? And maybe you're seeing evidence of that, but you wouldn't necessarily put two and two together unless you had that kind of raised in your consciousness through a training. So the hope is to open up the conversation and come to some kind of consistent understanding of what is hazing and what does it look like and what do I do if I see it. I think the other thing that was really striking for me during this legislative session is how many students stepped forward to support the new San Martinez Stop Hazing bill, increasing the penalties for hazing, including the president of the Interfraternity Council at Washington State University. Students are asking for more information and for an understanding of the guardrails around what we consider to be appropriate behavior. And, you know, I think bringing it out into the open and talking about it and sharing incidents that we know happen help them and help us all define what it is and work to stamp it out.
Great, thank you. This one question is for Ellie. It says, you have been an athlete for most of your life. Do you think it's ever too early to begin this education awareness and training? Definitely not. I think any opportunity you have to speak with young people about group dynamics, power dynamics, anything like that. And my experience is mostly rooted in sports, but any type of team activity, organization, I think it's never too early to have these conversations with young people in your lives about what are the ways that you're welcoming in newcomers? Are they going to make them feel good? Are there traditions that you do that we want to reevaluate? I think, yeah, even like any situation where there's a newcomer, and I think there's one discussion question I didn't show, but it's about if you were new on the team, what would you want? And that's part of the preseason session chat. And I think that's a really great question because it gets at the heart of, we've all been new into a group at some point in our lives, and we all know what that felt like. And so what helped us through that was, did someone come over and introduce themselves? Was there a welcome party? And I think, yeah, it's never too early to start having these conversations about ways that group dynamics exist, and also the ways that they can be changed. In speaking with a few coaches and athletic directors, it seems like sometimes these high school athletes who are stepping into leadership roles think that their team culture is concrete, it's set, and it's what it is. And my hope is that having a session like our new one that we launched today really helps these athletes recognize their agency in changing culture for the better. There's one question up here that is talking about, as someone who is not an athlete, what are some ways that we can see hazing traditions or tendencies in our day-to-day life? Like, are there any examples that are outside of sports and fraternity life that you can think of? Anyone on the panel can answer that.
Well, I can start us off. So there can be things like, for example, in a school, there can be unintended sort of power dynamics where there are traditions that the seniors implement when the first year students are coming in. That's often in high schools. And, you know, there can be something that seems seemingly, you know, innocuous, like a scavenger hunt, that then, depending on how it's implemented, can be problematic because it might involve maybe some illegal activity by like stealing some, you know, a road sign or property of some other sort. It might involve consumption of alcohol or other substances. It might involve, sometimes those type of scavenger hunts can involve sexual misconduct. It really does range. I mean, and you know, there are things like my own kids in the schools. There were things like that we heard about, like swirlies, where you know, the students had to, the new students on the team had to stick their head in the toilet in the locker room and have the toilet flushed. I mean, there are these types of things that you hear about on a fairly, well, I don't know if I would say regular basis, but you know, more often than you'd ever want to, I guess. That's the way I would say it. I think there are, you know, the typical kinds of hazing that people recognize as completely unacceptable and completely inappropriate happen. And it's, as we know, we also have to increase the recognition of those other forms of hazing that maybe we talked about the study hours. That seems like, how could that be hazing? Well, it depends, because if it's implemented in such a way that there's the study hours are so extensive that there's sleep deprivation, that a person is punished if they don't participate in them, or they're asked to participate in them to such an extent that they can't associate with other people outside of the group. There are many ways in which something like that can become hazing. And I think that's what we really need to be paying attention to, is really listening for some of those nuances that could indicate some problematic power dynamics and the potential for abuse.
Thank you. One other question I'm seeing directed at myself is, says, thanks for all your hard work. Can I ask what motivated you to be a leader in hazing prevention? Like I said, I've had a lot of experience on teams, and actually the athlete I spoke about earlier, my college teammate, came into our team culture as a first year and really shook things up. And I was an upperclassman, and she helped us recognize that we were doing some things that were playing into those power dynamics of separating out the first years from everyone else, of labeling them and having them do activities that were seemingly harmless. But as soon as she pointed out that it was due to this power structure and dynamic and how complicated and harmful that can become, she really opened my eyes to think more deeply about the impact that not only sports has on people, but teams and leadership. And so through her, I got connected to Athletes as Leaders. Gender-based violence is an issue that I care deeply about and had experience working as a domestic violence advocate. And so I found Athletes as Leaders through her, and it was just a perfect intersection of my passions for violence prevention and using sports to positively impact cultures and communities and individuals. And so I'm very grateful that I've had my time at Athletes as Leaders, and that it's also given me a platform to learn more about the issue of hazing and what can be done to prevent it. I'm seeing all of your amazing questions, and unfortunately, due to timing, we won't be able to get to all of them. I do want to flip the script and ask the audience a question. If you're able to, please type your answer in the chat. And the question is, how will you take what you learned here and apply it to your leadership and participation in groups and communities, wherever you are? What lessons will you take from here, and how will you use it in your life? And please put that in the chat if you're able to. So someone said, reach out to my athletic department and create a hazing prevention training on campus. That is great. And like I said, the preseason session is available online and free, ready to print and download. So please feel free and welcome to share that resource. Someone else said, I'm going to share this with the leadership of the summer camp where I used to work when in college. That's great. Like Rebecca said, this is recorded, and we'll be uploading it to our website for people to share and watch at a later time. Someone said, we've been using Athletes as Leaders at Middlebury, where I went to college, and have found it an excellent platform. So I look forward to adding the new preseason chat to our hazing resources. That is great. Someone else said, there are power dynamics in all spaces. Trying to ensure that all people feel seen and valued is critical to equity. Great. So that's really tapping into what Dr. Allen was saying about ensuring that equity and group dynamics, and that everyone is feeling like they have a voice and they're heard. And that's really essential in the hazing prevention frameworks. Thank you so much all for sharing in the chat. Please read through these. They're really great examples of ways to integrate the learnings from today into your lives. And remember that we're all part of a group, we're all part of a community. and the ways that we exist in those is incredibly important to our relationship. So my hope is that you learned something today about hazing prevention, and also more about how to live in community and how to be a respectful and great leader in that community. So thank you so much today for tuning in. Rebecca, do you have any last words before we time out?
Sure, thank you. Oh, hopefully you can all see me. Thank you so much, Jolene and Hector, for sharing your story. And thank you so much, Dr. Allen, for sharing your research, and all four of you for your advocacy in our field, and Ellie for helping us launch this new Athletes as Leaders session to have an option for folks younger than college. Because of course, when you're in the field of prevention, you know, it's like, this is an issue in college. Well, we need to address this in high school then, if we're truly being preventative. And then folks will often say, well, what about middle school? What about elementary school? And so I think there's always a piece of the puzzle in prevention that we can all contribute to. That said, I wanted to thank our panelists again. Ellie, thank you so much for organizing this and putting this on our radar and as a priority for us to all get trained and educated on. And again, to our panelists, I can't thank you enough. This was incredibly moving and powerful. And I know that folks today have a lot of amazing action steps that they're going to take as a result. So thank you again for your time. And I hope all of you have a good rest of your week.